Hi, I'm Anna Kate Willoughby, and this is a ancestry video for P through 5 social studies. And we are standing in my childhood home with my father, Des Smith, and my mother, Jenny Smith. And we are going to be going through my childhood home and talking about some of the history in our family and show you a little bit about who I am.
Well, I reckon what we need to do is start talking about my father, who's your grandfather, Dr. Henry Wilder Smith. He was a physician, a general practitioner. He practiced right here in Swainsboro, Georgia from 1946 until he passed away in 2002. And he, in his lifetime, he delivered 5,233 babies. And he was also a World War II veteran, and also Georgia's Outstanding Physician of the Year back in the late 1980s. And he was married to my mother, Leila Williams Smith, who was a pianist or organist for the Methodist Church for 40 years. And she was from Monroe, Georgia, Walton County. And they had 6 children and a whole herd of grandchildren.
Now, Daddy, you were born in 1942.
1942, that's correct.
So that was right around, that was during the World War II. That
Right.
Should be right about when it was ending.
That's right, and I'm considered a war baby.
Okay, so tell me how, if you know stories or know about what your parents talked about that era and what they had to go through in that era.
Well, you know, there was a lot of rationing going on during then, and I remember as a child, when we lived in Augusta, when my father was in medical school, the toys I got for Christmas as a 3- and 4-year-old were cardboard toys. And I remember putting those cardboard toys together because, you know, all the metal was used for World War II for building ships and guns and planes and that sort of thing. And also I remember us living in Augusta at a very young age. A lot of things happened that you know, I remember, like being bit.
What? Tell us about your journey to the power plant.
Oh, all right. Well, I was about 3 years old. My mother tells me this. All of a sudden, I disappeared, and they couldn't find me. We lived right in downtown Augusta, and so my father went looking for me, and he just happened to go by, as he called it, the bomb plant. It was a bomb plant that was in Augusta during World War II. And he saw me coming down the steps of the plant, and so he asked the security guard if he could go get his son. And he also asked me, you know, the guard, how did I get in that security area? And the guard told him that I told him that my father worked there, and that's why he let me in as a 3-year-old. So anyway, that security during World War II sometimes, you know, they didn't worry about 3-year-olds.
And you also took a trip on a bus. By yourself?
Well, that's the time when I disappeared, and my mother and daddy went looking for me, and they came down to the Walton Way where the buses were, and all of a sudden this bus stopped and let me out. And they talked to the bus driver, and it seems that I got on the bus with some lady, and they thought I was with her, but when they got to the end of the line, I was still there. So they brought me back to where I got on at. It just so happens Mom and Daddy were waiting on me. But now the story that stopped me from all this wandering days was I had ran away. They found me at a service station down the street, and the people there at the service station said they wanted, you know, that I wanted to go to work. And anyway, she found me down there, and before she went looking for me, she had called the police. She was so scared. And so she got me back home and was in the process, she was tearing my rear end up, you know, whipping me. And that's the first time they ever whipped me. And the police heard all the commotion in the house, and they kicked the door in with guns drawn because they thought somebody was killing somebody in there. And actually they said, "Keep on going, lady, keep on going."
So when were your parents married?
They married in 1942, and they were both from Tennille. That's a small town. My daddy grew up in the country, and my mama grew up in town. Tennille was not a big town. But my father had there were 5 children, 5 of those children, and one was Aunt Ruby. She was the second girl, and she was a school teacher, but she was killed in an automobile accident. finishing her first year teaching. My mother came from a large family. There were 13 of those children, and my mother was the 13th child. 13th child.
And then your mother was the
13th child. And Grandmama Sharam, my mother's people were Sharams, and my father's people were Lockharts. And Grandmama Sharam saw this advertisement in the paper that it was a 13th child contest, or the 12th child, whichever, but because that was their sequence, she sent in about Mama being her 13th child, and Mama won the contest, and they gave her a set of Peacock salt and pepper shakers. And we still have today.
But that was probably a big deal, though.
Oh yeah, that was China was a big thing back then.
Sure. All right, now your mother also played the piano.
Yes. In fact, all the Sharams, let me preface this by saying the Lockharts were farmers, mostly.
The Sharams.
The Sharams were very lively people. They were very smart, creative, think outside the box people, and hard workers. They had so many children. But Mother played the piano, and when I grew up in Wrightsville, we had 2 pianos in the hallway. One was Grandmama Sharam's and one was Mama's. But she played the piano with a doctor that lived across the street, Dr. Dodd, and on Sunday afternoons, that's what they did for entertainment, was play the piano. And my sister and I had to learn to sing and dance, and we sang Ball in the Jack, first 2 feet close up tight, you swing them to the left and swing them to the right. I've forgotten what the song is, but Mama taught us that. And then she wrote a song with my daddy, my sister. There's only my sister, my brother, and myself. My sister died 13 years ago of leukemia. But my mother, my daddy was in the Navy during World War II, and Mama wrote a song for him, and it was My Own True Love. And Mama would play. She wrote the music and she played it, and she had a good friend, Roy Dukes, who had a beautiful baritone voice, and they entered the Arthur Godfrey show. Now, most of you listening to this don't know what the Arthur Godfrey show is, but it was a talent show. And so Mama played and Roy Dukes sang, and they won first place in the talent contest. And so they recorded Mother's song on a 78. There was a 78 back then, and we have the record, and we have a tape of it. But and then she always called my daddy my buddy, and she recorded the song My Buddy. Y'all are not familiar with that, but the older ones in my generation know the song My Buddy.
All right. Now, Daddy, tell me about your grandparents.
On my mother's side.
Yep, go ahead.
Okay, well, that'd be John Mason Williams and also Kate Thompson Williams. They lived in Walton County all their lives. Well, actually, their later lives. They were born in 1887, both of them. They lived through World War I and through the Depression, and also World War II. Now, my grandmother Kate was an organist who played for the First Baptist Church in Monroe, Georgia for 40 years. And she raised 3 children, and she was Victorian age. Now, if you know, Victorian age was real proper. Now, her mother was raised during the 1880s. We'll talk about that later. But anyway, she was raised during the late 1800s and early 1900s, during the Victorian age. And my grandfather, John Mason Williams, was a scoutmaster in the early days. But one thing, he did play for the University of Georgia in his freshman year as a halfback, but he was cleated in his back, and it messed him up for a long. He never could run, couldn't play football after that. But anyway, he was a county school superintendent in Walton County in the 1940s. Really did good. And I remember going up to his office at the courthouse when I used to visit him. And also, he was, like I said, he was a scoutmaster. He also won the Silver Beaver Award, which is the highest award in scouting for an adult at that time. And
Didn't you win?
Yes, I did. Silver Beaver Award about 5 or 6 years ago. But anyway, Granddaddy Williams loved the outdoors, and he took his son, Mason Williams, on many camping trip and backpacking trip, and I remember he used to take us up the Stone Mountain, you know, when 78 used to run right in front of the mountain and not way off like it does now.
Now,
But
is it the bed that you have back there in the back, is that?
that's my Granddaddy Williams bed.
Bed.
It's a 3/4 bed, they call it, and it's
Right.
got, and the springs are like a springs in a like you were in the military.
That was my bed when I got older, which I love that bed.
Well, my grandfather used to tell us stories. He told us the best stories about chipmunks and that sort of thing. And I would lay on one side of him, and Wilder would lay on the other side of him, and he'd be laying in there with his T-shirt on, you know, that he slept in, and he'd tell us those stories. And Granddaddy Williams, pretty heavy fella, but anyway, in his later life. But anyway, he told us some great stories, and I slept on that bed the other night when we had when my son Richard and his wife and my grandson came, and that's the best sleeping bed in the world. I think I'm gonna move back there. No, Judy, I've just got that. All right, now on my Smith side, on the grandparents, my father's father was Dr. Dexter Smith. He was a physician. He graduated from Medical College of Georgia in 1908. And he was a physician here in Swainsboro, a general practitioner and a surgeon. And he and his wife bought this house in 1922 from A.S., I can't remember his last name right now, but he was a photographer. And they bought this house from him in 1922 and raised all their 6 children here. And anyway, he was, like I say, he was a physician. He practiced medicine and did a lot of things during World War I. And then World War II, he was actually examining people that were going off for active duty to fight during World War II, and he did a lot of things for the military. Dr. Dessy lost his wife, Mama Gladys, in 1947, and for the last 6 years of his life, he entertained his youngest daughter and a lot of their girlfriends on trips and that sort of thing. And one time, my Aunt Iris told me they were down in Daytona Beach, Florida, and this was about 1952, and had she and 3 of her other girlfriends, and they were all down there, and they decided to go out and eat supper or something, and he stayed in the motel. And anyway, they wound up at some honky-tonk, as Aunt Iris said, and Aunt Iris was a singer, and they got to singing up there and with the band, and they must have stayed there about 1 o'clock. Anyway, when they got back to the motel, Aunt Iris said that Dr. Dessy was so mad he packed them all up and they came home. Because they got in so late. But that was back in 1952. And Mama Gladys, my grandmother on my daddy's side, was she was responsible for the welfare program coming into Emmanuel County during the 1930s. And she helped that and was assistant for bringing that here in town. And also she was all the DAR meetings to form the DAR chapter here at the David Emanuel chapter of the DAR was held in this very room. Every planning committee was held here until the last one, and then it was held somewhere else.
Now, Mama Gladys was also a whiz at genealogy.
Oh yes, she was. Now she did it.
What did she track who did she track our family back to?
Well, she tracked most of her family and the Wilders, the Hunts, the Hardens, and the Stovalls, the Manns, all those. But she did it the hard way. Back in the old days where you actually had to travel to different communities and travel to the different courthouses and write letters to people and hunt out all this. Nowadays we can do most of it by computer online, but she did it the hard way.
But who did she track us back to?
Well, she did. She tracked us back to Pocahontas, and not through John Smith. We're not talking about John Smith. But this was whoever Pocahontas married, and I can't remember right now, but we actually have some Indian blood in us from Pocahontas. And, here's a good one. My grandmother, Williams, she had a cousin, and if anybody's familiar with poetry, Daniel Dickey, he wrote 4 or 5, he was a famous author, 4 or 5 books back in the early 1920s and 30s. You can go online and see if you can find some of those copies. Anyway, that was her cousin. And also another cousin of hers was Julian Foster. Julian Foster and A.J. Foster. I'll tell you a funny story about A.J. right quick. When my grandfather died, everybody came to the funeral in Monroe, and that was in 1965. Well, A.J. was there, and he was real heavy, and he sat out in a Cadillac with air conditioning going because grandmother's house wasn't air conditioned. This was during the summer. He sat out there until lunch was ready, and then it was about 50 of us came in, we ate. And I remember he was sitting at my table, and when his wife came over to ask what he wanted for dessert, he said, well, what do we have? And she says, well, we have pecan pie and chocolate pie, lemon pie, coconut pie, strawberry pie. We have lemon cake, we have chocolate cake, German chocolate cake, these different kinds. And she said, which one would you like to have? He said, I'll take one of each. And look here, I believe she did bring him one of each he could eat. And then the other one, Julian Foster. Julian worked with Coca-Cola Company in South America, and he had a lot of blue stock in Coca-Cola Company from the early years. And he was a vice president of some sort. But he bought, after the Gone with the Wind, he actually bought the film set Tara that was used during the film, and had it stored in Atlanta, in somewhere over close to Carrollton, in a barn. And he was going to make some sort of theme center out of it, but he never did, and he died. Well, a lot of my family thought that was incorrect until the book came out. It's called The Last Confederate Soldier or something like that. And in that book, it talks about Herman Talmadge's first wife, Betty Talmadge, knowing where that terror was stored. And the way they found it is they went back in his records, because nobody knew where it was, but they went back in his records and found out where he had paid rent on this barn in the country, and they went, and that's where they found that set. And somebody bought the theme set, for Tara, that was used during Gone with the Wind after that, and I'm just not sure what happened to it.
Wow.
But anyway.
Well, you've heard Dennis's side of his family. As my people said, I married up. I didn't have doctors and superintendents. We were just hard-working people. And I have a lot of strange stories and characters in my family that gives us our unique personalities, and helps Santa Kate to have her unique personality, and all my children. One of the stories, and I just have stories. I don't have that many memories. My mother died when I was 8 of cancer, and then my father died when I was 13, and my brothers and sisters and I were separated and lived with different relatives. So I don't have a lot of memories about my mama, except playing the piano, and she was always taking food to people and seeing about different people. But I don't have that many childhood memories. There were not very many pictures made of us when we were little. Mama was sick. Mama was sick most of the time, so I don't remember that. But anyway, I do remember my aunts and uncles telling me different stories about my Sharon side. The Lockharts were just straight up and down hard-working farmers, and they didn't play a whole lot. They were just good people. But my Sharon side were just full of activity and fun. And I had mothers, like I said, mother was the 13th child. There was only 3 girls, and the rest were boys. My grandfather Sharon, Zach Sharon, built cotton gins all over Georgia and parts of South Carolina. Well, the boys, he would let them go through the 6th grade, and then he made them get out of school. And this was during the Depression, so everybody had to work during the Depression. And the boys, when they got old enough and they graduated from 6th grade, he'd take them out of school, and they'd go all over Georgia building cotton gins. When the girls stayed home, now the girls did get an education. The teachers' college in Milledgeville, that's what it was called back then, a teachers' college, women's college. That's where the girls went to school, and my mama got a 2-year degree. Back then, to teach, you only had to have a 2-year degree, and you could teach school. So she got that. She never taught school, though. She worked as a city clerk in Tennille. But my Uncle Paul,
Okay, now your Aunt Bill.
Well, she was my Aunt Bill Sharon. She married my Uncle Harvey, and she was a school teacher. She taught trigonometry in high school, and when I graduated in '66, there were not that many occupations that you could go into as a woman, secretary or teacher or nurse. There were others, but that was the basics. So my aunt wanted me to be a teacher because she was one. And so she, along with my daddy's Social Security money and veterans money, because he was a veteran, Navy veteran, I went to school on that, and my aunt helped me pay my tuition, and that's how I went through school, college.
And you went where?
I went to South Georgia first for 2 years, and then I transferred to Southern. And I graduated from Southern with a degree in early childhood education. And then I went back several years later and got my master's in reading. And
how many years did you
I
teach?
taught 40 years. I
40
taught,
years.
started out in the 4th grade, then I went to the 1st grade, and then I ended up in kindergarten and loved every minute of it. But going back to my Sharon family, they had the wanderlust. Now, I'll tell you about my Uncle George in just a few minutes, but they all had the wanderlust. They just, I guess because they worked so hard for their daddy, when Papa Sharon died, they just really took off on their own, and my Uncle Paul was a real character. Now, most of the Sharons were prone to take a drink. Now, that just was part of that was just them. They just loved to take a drink. Papa Sharon did, and Mom Sharon even, I think, took a sniffle every once in a while. But my Uncle Paul was the wanderer in the family. Now, his wife was taught school here in Swainsboro, and she taught senior English. Very straight up lace, but and they had one child. But Uncle Paul, she just let him wander because that was what he was going to do anyway. And he would just he went all over the United States. And he would come back to reunions, and he'd talk about living with the Indians and eating snakes and little lizards and things like that. But anyway, when he came back to Tennille one time for a reunion, he was three sheets in the wind. And he stripped off all his clothes, and he climbed the Christian church steeple, which is very high, butt naked, and sang, "Near My God to Thee." Now that's my family. And they had to get a big ladder because they didn't have fire trucks back then that could, had ladders. So they just got a big ladder, and my Uncle Wade had to climb up and get him off the church steeple.
And then he also, what did he bring your grandma?
Oh, now that was another uncle. Then my Uncle Lewis, he was prone to drink too. They were just happy people. My Uncle Lewis, and they all loved their mama. I mean, they just loved their mama. Anyway, Uncle Lewis went to the fair, to the circus, and they had it in Tennille, which was right across the railroad track from where they lived in Tennille. And he brought Mom Sharon a monkey. He paid for it, bought it. He must have won it. I don't know how he got it or talked somebody out of it, and brought Mama Sharon a monkey. And they built it a cage so that there was an open window in the kitchen, and the cage faced toward the kitchen, but he could go in and out as the monkey wanted to. He could just go in and out.
She had him for a long time, right?
Oh, she had him for a long time until he died. Yeah, and everybody just had to put up with it because that was Mama Sharon's monkey. Now, my famous uncle is this uncle. This is Uncle George Sharon, and he was referred to as, he fought during the Civil War, and most of the battles in the Civil War. He was known nationwide as a Confederate who walked hundreds of miles to veteran reunions. This is probably where Uncle Paul got all this from. Now, he lived to be 98 years old, and he walked all over the United States. And he had a cotton candy machine. It was a handheld cotton candy machine, and that's how he made his money, with selling cotton candy on the side. But he walked to reunions all over. Here he is, a picture of him walking right there. At that time, he was 83. His longest trip was from Memphis, Tennessee to Hollywood, California. And he was 85 years old when he walked that trip.
Wow.
And he wound up in the old Confederate soldiers' home in Atlanta. But he wouldn't stay there. He kept slipping out, and they'd have to go find him. And so finally, they traced him back to Tennille, his last trip out. He was 96 years old. And they found him in Tennille. He had walked all the way from Atlanta. At 96, he had walked all the way from Atlanta to Tennille. He probably hitchhiked some. And they told him he was going to have to go back and stay there. And he said, well, the only way I'm going to stay is if you let me go fishing every day. So they took him fishing the next day. And 2 years later, and he was contented, he stayed. 2 years later, at 98, he died.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, now I'm going to show you pictures of some of our family history, and we are going to start here with my parents. This was at my wedding, and you can see my dad was in the service. He was in the Army for
Army Guard for 32 years.
32 years, and you
Retired in
as a lieutenant
1997.
colonel.
Right, 1997. And I'll kind of help you out a little bit, Aunt Kate. If you'll kind of move over to the wall, in 1970, my sister had her picture taken on the steps, these steps to the left. And so it's been kind of a tradition then, any bride in the family that had a picture taken on the steps, we would put a picture on the wall. And so right now you can see that we have 16 so far. And if you'll notice over here on the other wall, if you didn't have your picture taken on the steps, like my wife in 1970, this is the outlaw wall right here, and this is my wife Jenny in 1970. Okay, now let's move around the room a little bit. All right. Down at the end of the hall, we have my wife's father, W.H. Lockhart, and her mother, Mary Ellen Sharon Lockhart. And then Jenny and Ann and Buddy as children. Over on the other wall, that's been hanging here since the 1930s, I reckon, that's a picture of my grandmother, Gladys Wilder Smith. And she died in 1947, was born in 1885. 5 generations. This is a picture of the 5 generations of doctors in the Smith family. Dr. B.D. Smith, 1853, Dr. George L. Smith, 1881, Dr. Desi Smith, 1908, Dr. Wilder, 1946, and Dr. George Smith, my brother, in 1981. And this is the picture of my wife's Sharon family. This is Zach Sharon and his wife, and their 13 children, and some of them were married by then. And this is Jenny's mother, Mary Ellen Sharon, right here, her mother. And right next to it is a picture of my father and his 4 siblings. That's George L. Smith II, my father. This was taken during 1944-45. My Aunt Margaret, my Aunt Sarah Nell, and my Aunt Iris. Now this is the picture of Zach Sharon and his wife. What was her name? This is Alice Cofield Lockhart. And this is Lula Ann Bellisle Sharon. This is Jenny's granddaddy, Pa Lockhart. He lived to be 93 years old. And this is a picture of my father, Dr. Wilder Smith, during World War II, and my mother, Lila William Smith. This is the picture of my oldest son, Desi, and his wife, Terry, and their 3 children, my grandchildren. And this is a picture of Anna Kate, her husband, Kenneth, and Smith and Wesson, of all things. I asked them when they had the next child, were they going to name it Ruger or Remington? And then here's a picture of my son, Richard, my youngest son, his wife, Katie, and Ethan, their beloved dog. And anyway, they have since then had me a 11-month-old grandchild named Torpin.
And my sister.
Oh, and my sister, Marielle.
Your
I saw my
daughter.
oldest daughter,
Anna Kate.
Marielle.
Not your sister.
Marielle. And a picture of the 4 generations. I am the young child, and this was taken just in front of the hospital, Smith Sanitarium on Church Street that I was born in, just down the street. This is my father, Dr. Wilder Smith. He was in medical school during World War II. My grandfather, Dr. Desi, he was 58 then. And this is my great-grandfather, Dr. George L. Smith, and he was 83 years old at that particular time. And that was taken in 1943.
It has to be a true love, darling, for you and me. We'll make the grade together. Just wait and see. Now dreams are one thing, our love another, but dreams and love like ours make the world go round and round. Now this is the story of our own true love, and we will love each other on and on. Now dreams are one thing, our love another, but dreams and love like ours make the world go round and round. Now this is the story of our own true love, and we will love each other